Hello, friends. Joe Lynch here from the Logistics of Logistics. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is the Broker Carrier Summit, from conflict to collaboration, with my friend Dan Lindsey. How's it going, Dan?
Doing well, Joe. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. So, Dan, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
Yeah, so my name is Dan Lindsey. I'm calling from Fishers, Indiana, just on the northeast side of Indianapolis, and I am with the Broker Carrier Summit. We are a semi-annual conference, trade show, business network, and connecting tool for brokers and carriers.
Just Dan, before we hit the record button, we're catching up, and I said to you, and I'd not say this not being promotional, the Broker Carrier Summit is one of those conferences that popped up in the last, a couple of years ago. I remember I interviewed you just for your first one. And it feels so ground roots. Everybody seems to feel like they own it. I was Instant Manifest. You were there. I didn't see you, unfortunately. When you talk about people going to Broker Carrier Summit, they act like they have ownership in this conference. It is very much a groundswell. I feel like it just grew out of the cornfields of Indiana.
Yeah, it speaks to one of the things that we've known for a long time in this industry is that everybody has a voice and everybody wants their voice to be heard. And I think one of the things that people understand about the Broker Carrier Summit is whether you're a carrier or a fleet of 1,000 trucks or an owner operator or a dispatcher or a broker or an agent, whatever role you play in the industry, we go out of our way to make sure you understand that your voice matters, your voice is needed. And as long as everyone is 100% brutally honest with themselves, everyone will move forward if the right conversations are had. And so I think that's one of the reasons why people like it so much. And to the point where half of our attendees come back over and over again. So we're gearing up for our Indianapolis Summit, and half the people who are signed up are previous attendees already.
Yeah. So let's talk about the history of this. So you had the first Broker Carrier Summit in Indiana.
Yes. Yeah, it was Indianapolis.
It was a trial run. So talk about all the BCSs we've had so far.
Yeah. So the history of the BCS is a wild one. I had the idea. I was talking with, this story is in BCS lore and legend now. It's my conversation with Robert Bain and Matt Annis at TIA. And
the strongest man in logistics. I just talked to him.
Yeah. So we talked to TIA, I think it was in 22. We were in San Diego at the Morton Steakhouse down there by the convention center. And we were just talking about our frustrations about the industry. And I brought up the idea of over a few bourbons, I will admit.
Where all the best ideas come from. And all the worst ideas too.
Yeah, all the ideas are found at the bottom of a glass or two. But I was like, what if somebody needs to create a way in which everybody in the industry can just get together, hash out their differences, and come together as an industry. And there was a little bit more involved conversation around that. But he said, if you ever decide to do anything like that, let me know and I'll be a part of it. The next January, I was driving down to Florida with my family for a Christmas break. And I wrote down some notes. I had my wife pull my phone up and write down some notes about a carrier broker symposium where we would just clear the air about things like double brokering and fraud and lack of transparency and trust and all those things. And so the first one was held, largely we didn't know what was going to come of it. I thought it was going to be a one-time thing because we didn't know if it was going to gain traction or not. We had 35 people come in from around the country, and another 35 joined online. So 70 people to hear from somebody they didn't know, talk about things that were unpopular, and at a time when arguably broker carrier relations in March of 2023 were, I would say, at an all-time low. And so people came as far as Los Angeles, Maine, South Carolina to participate in something that they thought would be positive in the industry. And so that was in April of 2023. Fast forward to October, we decided to do it again. We had one request: let's do it somewhere sunny next time. So we picked Tampa, Florida, which we found out.
Talked to you just before the Tampa one and after the Indiana one. And I remember you were also making a family vacation out of the trip to Florida.
Yeah, I was going to join my family down at Rosemary Beach or in Destin the weekend afterwards. Yeah. But we found out that was not the most convenient place for trucks to go. And so one of the things that it's really cool about the BCS is that every time we hold an event or every time we do anything, we are learning as an organization. I'm learning as a business leader. I'm not an event manager. I'm not an event planner. I'm a freight broker. I was a freight broker. I started at TQL in 2013. I was there for 6.5 years. I went to go work for a supply chain consulting firm doing business development for partial spend management tools. In 2019, 2020, I started my own freight brokerage, scaled that up to about $10 million in top line revenue after 3 years. I've spent almost my entire professional career in the freight broker side. But so event planning is new. But every time we put on an event, we're learning. And one of the ways we learn is we ask for feedback directly from our attendees. And this is the revolutionary part. We actually read the feedback. And when we read the feedback, we actually do the things that the attendees ask that we do. Everything that we do at the BCS, we do because it's been requested by our attendees or by our members.
So after the Florida one, was that the one was it Kansas City or St. Louis?
That was Kansas City. Kansas City was a turning point.
Which side? Kansas City, Missouri, or Kansas City, Kansas?
Technically, it was Overland Park. I think that's the Missouri side. No, is it the Kansas side? I can't remember. Well, I'll have to ask all my friends.
They shouldn't have it so confusing.
No, it's a pick a state already, would you? But no, so yeah, Kansas City was a breakout moment for us. We had 370 people.
The middle of the country. I like that.
Middle of the country. And that's intentional. Again, everything we do, we try to be intentional about it. We try to make it the BCS as accessible as possible for specifically for carriers and for small fleet operators, because we know how expensive and how difficult it is to take your truck off the road, even for a day, much less 2 or 3 days or a week for some of these events. And so we want to make sure it's in an area that, one, they can get to easily, two, they can get out of, hopefully profitably as well. But we expanded the summit from a 1-day event to 2 days in Tampa to 3 days with a golf tournament in Kansas City. And I think we had 40 speakers in Kansas City, including leaders in the industry. Our partnerships with our sponsors had expanded quite a bit as well. That carried over into our most recent event in Fort Worth last October, where we had 500 people at the BCS in Fort Worth. And it just keeps growing. And the numbers themselves are not, I don't think, the most indicative factor of our growth. I think the most important factor of our growth is the quality of relationships and connections that come out of it.
Dan, that's so true. Before we hit the record button, I was saying, everybody's talking about BCS. And I said, this is fantastic what you've built. Because I've been a little bit of a spectator, been on the podcast, talk about it. And I remember I said something about, how do you grow this, scale this without losing your soul? And I know that you said that's something that you're very concerned in. The people involved are very concerned. We want to grow it, but we don't want to have it become something that we didn't intend.
Yeah. You have to know, and this goes back to one of our core principles. One of these days we'll have to write all these core principles down. But one of our core principles is you have to know yourself. And not only know yourself, you have to be brutally honest with yourself. The BCS as an event and as a business network serves a purpose. Let's compare it for a second to an event that we both just went to, Manifest. That is a much different event.
That's the Super Bowl of supply chain and logistics.
Super Bowl supply chain. There's 7,000 people. Techie. There's a vibe there. There's a Flow Rida plays at the end. Played us out at the end. It's great. It has a purpose in the industry, and it serves that purpose extraordinarily well. Likewise, the BCS has a specific purpose in the industry, and we have to make sure that we stay true to what that purpose is. And that goes through everything, whether it's how many people we have, what the mix of people we have between brokers and carriers and service providers is, what our educational content looks like, the quality of our networking, everything, intentionality, authenticity, everything factors into. If we get to a point where it's all about the number of attendees or the number of sponsorships or all this, we're going to lose what has made the BCS the groundswell that it has become.
It's special, and I likened it One of my long blathering stories was I heard this. I've never been a big Genesis fan, but I remember I saw Phil Collins one time talking about this. He said, for a long time, we were unsigned and we're playing, and everyone says, you guys are this, you're great. He had this huge following. He says, and then we got signed, we made some albums, and then all these people were like, yeah, those guys are sellouts. They sold their soul. And he says, you can't win. He goes, you can be poor and not and say we're being true to ourselves. He goes, we didn't feel like we changed, but the world changed around us. And that's sometimes what happens. So I think as long as you stick to you just said you're going to write down those core values. I think you epitomize them right now. But as you guys grow, they'll end up being the foundation.
Yeah, and I made the comment in a joking way, but not really, to the board and the team. And I made this from the stage at the summits. Like, one of my jobs as the founder, visionary, whatever you want to call it, of the BCS is to make sure that we don't grow too fast or we don't overshoot our skis. Again, everything we do is designed to add value. So if we start adding things to the summit or to the freight network or to the media, what we're going to be adding throughout the rest of the year, and those things are not adding value, we want people to tell us so we stop doing those things. We're not going to just do things just to do things.
Dan, this event's coming up quick. So when is it and where is it?
So it's going to be April 28th to May 2nd in Indianapolis, Indiana. It's going to be downtown at the Union Station.
So say that one more time. April what?
Yeah, April 28th to May 2nd.
Okay. And that's what day is April 28th?
That's a Monday. It goes through Friday. We're calling it, this is Trey Gregg's idea, we're calling it Summit Week. And for the carriers out there who might be listening, you don't have to stay the entire week. Because again, we know how expensive it is to take your truck off the road, even for a single day. So we do have day passes available. We do have some scholarships available remaining for carriers and owner operators to come on a single day or on 2 days. And so don't let the idea of it being lasting an entire week be a deterrent for you.
So you get there Monday morning and leave Friday afternoon?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Very nice. And now where is this located at?
So historic Union Station, downtown Indianapolis. The hotel is the Crown Plaza. And it is basically, it's a converted train station from the 19th century. And we're going to be in the Grand Ballroom, which was the main terminal for the trains.
And how far away is this from Chicagoland?
3.5 hours.
I think it's 5 hours from where I live in the Detroit metro area. I think for people who are not familiar, Indianapolis is a tech center. And I think everybody who's listening, who might be Boston, Austin, or Silicon Valley goes, oh, no, that's not it. But it is very much a tech place. And I think sometimes the flyover states, and I live in one of them, get overlooked when it comes to what's going on in those cities. It's a vibrant city, and there's a ton of freight there.
Oh, a ton of freight.
And a ton of logistics companies.
Yeah, a ton of logistics companies, ton of freight, tons of brokerages popping up. Indianapolis is where I live, so I started my brokerage there. I'm friendly with almost all of the brokers in and around the Indianapolis metropolitan area, and so I can vouch for many of them as well. So there's a lot of good companies, a lot of good people. Again, this industry is full of people that are just salt of the earth, high quality, high speed, low drag kind of people. They move fast, they do honest work, and they don't really take any crap. And those kind of people are the target of who we want to attend the BCS.
Yep. So I want to talk about the name of the topic today is the Broker Carrier Summit, from conflict to collaboration, with my friend Dan Lindsey. When we were prepping for this, and we talked a few weeks ago. We talked before Manifest, I believe. And we talked about what you guys are all about. And it was really trying to break down this conflict that is somewhat inherent in the broker-carrier relationship. And over the last decade, we've seen a tremendous amount of success in this business. A larger percentage of freight is now brokered than previous. It used to be somewhere less than 20%. I think it shot up to 25% during COVID, and now it might be down to 20 again, 21. I think Kevin Hill said it was probably traditionally 15%. And so the industry's seen success. Now, granted, 3,000 at the top, the 25,000 are really successful. But there's a lot of good businesses in the last 22,000. But here's the thing that we've seen: tons of tech. Everyone's got a transportation management system. Everybody's got some of the killer apps that are the visibility apps or the pricing apps. We're automating a lot more. We're streamlining with technology, all good things. But there are fewer phone calls between the broker and the carrier because we've automated that, which is not a bad thing in and itself. But what's happened is we've lost that relationship. And we do know there is conflict in this relationship. It's almost built in. And I'll describe it, and then we'll get into some of the challenges. But if I'm a broker and I get a load for $2,500, I'm excited, and I say, "Oh, cool! I think I can make some money on this." I end up paying some carrier $2,200, and it's a little less than I thought I was going to make. And then the carrier is looking and going, "This isn't enough. God darn it! I took the load. It's not enough. I'm not making enough money with my truck." The broker feels like he didn't make enough money, but at least he knows what the top line was. The carrier has the sense that, oh, that broker's making a lot of money. And there's this sense that nobody's making money, but the carriers sometimes believe the broker's making a lot of money. And maybe in the past they did. I don't know. So there's always going to be instances where somebody made $1,000 and they go ring a bell somewhere in the building. I don't think that's very common these days, though.
It's not as common anymore, that's for sure.
Yeah. So there's this lack of trust. So talk about that lack of trust in this relationship and how tech has made it more difficult. Not, by the way, not just tech, but also fraud. Talk about that.
Yeah, and the fraud is a big piece. But let's go back all the way to when I was a wee lad, the 1980s, when deregulation hit the trucking industry. The relationship between freight brokers, this is one of the misconceptions about freight brokers. People in the trucking world think that freight brokers are a result of deregulation. There were freight brokers before deregulation. The relationship looked different than it does now, but there were freight brokerages in existence before deregulation. What deregulation did, however, is it fundamentally changed the nature of the relationship between brokers and carriers, and it allowed brokerages to form more easily. So the barrier for entry for a freight broker became extremely low. And likewise, the barrier for entry for a new trucking company became extremely low because it was just as difficult for a trucking company to come into existence as it was for a brokers to come into existence before regulation. If you didn't know somebody, or you were not on a senator's radar, or you didn't have an in with the right organization, you were not going to get a tariff. You just weren't. Or if you weren't part of a network or an association. Deregulation allowed for more companies and individuals to enter into the space. What that did is it diversified the kinds and types of people that were coming into the industry, and it forced people to have relationships with people that they would not have had before. And so I think what we've seen over the last 40 years in this relatively deregulated environment is people are trying to figure out how to have the most optimal relationships with each other from the broker and carrier perspective. And that's not an easy conversation to have. And trying to build relationships on a foundation of trust, I would venture a guess and say the last 40 years have not been the least volatile in our economy or in our domestic landscape. So there's been a lot of change, a lot of different moving pieces within the supply chain and transportation worlds, and building trust is hard. And neither side have done themselves any favors. One of the things we say, and I'm sorry I've escaped in trouble, but everybody needs to own their own shit.
You said that to me before we hit record.
That's one of my biggest personal and professional principles.
DCS. Everybody needs to own their own shit.
Own your shit. Brokers, and I say it to both sides, brokers, there have been some things, many things that brokers have done over the years that have eroded trust, sometimes intentionally. And you know what? As an industry, brokers, we need to own that. Not doing so is dishonest and does not foster trust. Likewise, carriers, same thing. I've talked to somebody who blew 4 turbos in a week. I call BS on that as a broker. So everybody needs to own their own stuff. And once we are brutally honest with ourselves, that gives us the right to be brutally honest with each other.
Yeah, we say this is a relationship business, meaning I'm going to win. They have a relationship with the shipper, a relationship with the trucking company, but the technology has disconnected us a lot. And by the way, it allows us to do a lot more loads per day, which is great. And we sometimes say the technology allows me to do the tech stuff and free me up as the individual to build relationships with my customer, whether it's a carrier or broker, build those relationships. I don't think we necessarily do. And it's funny to call this a relationship business when, as you just described, is sometimes a very dysfunctional relationship.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I love the tech that we're seeing in the industry. I think the freight tech boom is just getting started, and I'm really excited to see what comes down the road. But one of the things that we have to understand and know going into this new environment and is that you can't outsource trust to technology.
Not yet.
Nobody, not yet. Yeah, you can't. Nobody has a relationship with a bot. Okay, they have a relationship with people, and so no matter how much tech you have or how dynamic your stack is, at the end of the day, you are in a relationship with a carrier, brokers, a driver in the seat. Carriers, you're in a relationship with a broker in the seat, making phone calls. So we need to understand that you can't outsource trust to technology.
Yep. So we've seen some freight fraud in this business, and a lot of solutions have popped up. Solutions like Highway and others have popped up, and I think everybody's more aware that there's a fraud problem. I should ask this: is there going to be some information about freight fraud and how to prevent it at this conference?
Absolutely. We have a whole track dedicated to fraud prevention and compliance. 100%. Yeah. And Highway is sponsoring that track, actually, by the way.
All right.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, too, that is in 2023, when the BCS started, freight fraud was the hot topic, and it still is to some extent. But freight fraud is not the problem. Freight fraud is a symptom of a problem. And because the core problem is, again, people are trying to outsource relationships to technology. We're trying to commoditize the relationship between the broker and the carrier. And we're not, very few people in this industry are trying to do the heavy lifting of actually managing relationships in a professional and consistent way. And when you take that personal connection out and outsource all those conversations to a bot or to technology or to a platform, it's no wonder that people are going to find loopholes in that.
Dan, it's interesting you should say that. Maybe a year or so ago, I interviewed Ann Reinke from TIA. Now she's at IANA. And I'm going to interview her from there too. But I remember before we hit record, she said, Joe, what would you do about freight fraud? Well, how to prevent it? And I said, you never get defrauded by someone you've been talking to on the phone for 10 years. I said, you get defrauded by somebody who says, hey, I can't talk to you on the phone. We'll just communicate by text, and I don't have a website yet.
Yeah, I'm not going to accept tracking.
But I'm $20 cheaper, so what are you going to do, right?
But again, that's one of the built-in benefits to the Broker Carrier Summit is the double brokers, the scammers, the freight thieves. They are not going to come for a number of reasons. One, Robert Bain is there, and he'll probably mess people up. Two is that we will.
Robert is the compliance officer.
He's the freight bouncer. Two is we will find them out before they're able to attend. We have relationships with all of the fraud prevention tools, all of the brokers in the industry and the carriers in the industry that are trying to actively prevent this. We have relationships with those people and those companies. If you are a scammer, if you are a fraudster, you will be not so respectively turned away at the door. So they're not going to be there.
But they're not the type who would spend time on a relationship conference. And again, this is very much a relationship conference. The Broker Carrier Summit, and again, it is to take that conflict and turn it into collaboration. And I think the second point I wanted to talk to you about is this othering. And I was talking to you about this before we hit the record button, is we do it all the time. So right now we have a new president, and people who voted for him, oh my God, I love what he's doing. I love what the administration's blah, 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 whatever their position is. And then the people who don't like him, and they the end of the world, whatever they're saying. And we tend to just want to put them all in big categories as the others. And the others have bad intentions. And I think I've talked to a lot of carriers, I talked to a lot of brokers. There's a tendency to do the othering because you don't meet in person. It's really hard to sit down and have a beer with somebody and say they're the other because you get to know them. You go, oh, I guess you got the same problems I got. He's trying to make a living. He's got family. He's got health. He's got all the other things I have.
It must be a great life to be the one who's always right.
You did.
Yeah, it must be nice. Yeah,
If you go to this conference, you're meeting, if you're a broker and you're meeting this trucking company and you're like, well, let me explain to you why trucking companies are always ripping me off. And then when you're done, I'd like to explain why brokers are always ripping me off.
we've had that. We had that in the room in Tampa and in Kansas City. And we just sit back and we let the conversation happen. And guess what? At the end of that session, these two guys or these five people, whoever, they go off, they have a beer together, they sit down, they start talking. We had people do deals on the heels of that kind of a conversation.
Are there group hugs there? Because I'm not going if there's gonna be a lot of hugging.
I have not met a lot of huggers myself. I'll make you this promise, Joe. I will not hug you. How about that?
It's a
Is that
deal.
good?
So we're using a lot of technology, and and I think this is very positive development. We have numbers, better numbers than ever before, whether they're the financial numbers or the performance numbers. I love KPIs. Obviously, we all have to use business discussions to control our businesses. So we all want to know, how much did I make? How much did I lose? What's going on? So we use numbers, and they're better than ever before. And the KPIs and the analytics that we have are better than ever before. But that's seemingly not enough. And I said to you, I think it's just the beginning of the conversation. And if I'm saying, hey, Dan, here's all the KPIs. We did really well. And those are great KPIs, Joe. I lost money last week. That is not good. And your KPI doesn't reflect that. Please elaborate.
Yeah. So as a freight broker or a leader of a freight brokerage, I should say, leader of a startup freight brokerage. So our gross margins were between 12 and 18%, depending on the quarter, depending on the seasonality. Our net margin was 1.2%. And if you asked me at any given point in any given month, I could tell you what our run rate was, what our load count was, what our average rate per mile was, and what our average margin was. That is not common in the industry, especially on the carrier side. And if we're going to talk about everybody owning their own stuff, shall we say, if you don't know your numbers, in my mind, you have zero right to complain about somebody who does. If you don't know what your cost is per mile, drivers, owner operators, fleet managers, that it really isn't going to matter whether or not the broker is making $1,000 on your load or not, or whether he's underpaying you or overpaying you. Because if you don't know your numbers, no amount of money that you can make is going to help you become profitable. I'm sorry, but it's not. And that goes the same for brokers. Just because you got dollars a mile on a load and you paid a carrier $4 doesn't mean that you're running that load for a profit, because you still have all the tech in the background. You still have a staff to pay. You still have all these different tools that you're using. And the average broker sitting in the seat does not know the average cost per load that the brokerage incurs.
Yeah. Yeah. We saw this with Lyft and Uber a few years ago, where a ton of people who were doing Lyft and Uber and saying things like, oh, I'm making 75 grand on the side, and all sorts of exciting money being made. And then over time, they started realizing, yeah, but I got to make a car payment going through a lot of gas. And then found out, oh, I'm not making that great of money after all. And they started exiting the business. And in our business, we've seen a lot of changes. Suddenly we have the Sprinter vans that popped up, and now we could put 2 or 3, 4 pallets in there, replacing an LTL sometimes. We see the Conaline vans. We've seen all sorts of stuff. that were traditionally outside of the broker's world. We didn't look at the we didn't look at those guys. They're like, "Nope, that they do deliveries. We don't do that. We're transportation logistics over here." Now they've come into our business, and a lot of those guys, I talk to them. A lot of those guys are finding out, I don't understand my numbers well enough. I because it's one of those things where it's seemingly, as you said, I made $800 today. I made $400 yesterday, and then you go, "What do you pay on gas? What's your payment on insurance? What's your truck payment?" You go, "Oh, wait a sec. I didn't make the kind of money I thought I made."
Those aren't the numbers we like to add up.
And so I think there's people who are don't want we need the drivers to be successful. So brokers don't exist without carriers, and let's face it, a lot of brokers help carriers stay in business. This I think the relationship when it works is absolutely perfect. It's just when it's not working is when you need to build those relationships. And again, broker carrier is somewhat the place to do that. So yeah, getting the numbers right, I think, is important. And I think, as I said, Dan, I think also discussing what's around those numbers, because sometimes you look at a spreadsheet and say, yeah, the business is the spreadsheet, but it's also all of the stuff right outside the spreadsheet. What caused all these numbers? And is your partner making money? I can tell you one of my best customers when I was at a 3PL, we would go through once a week, all through our numbers. And then at the end, I would also often get a phone call right after the meeting. And it was my customer contact. And she would say, "We love what you're doing. Are you making money?" I was like, I was thinking, how often has someone asked, "Are you making money?" And she goes, "I don't want you to rip us off. I just need to know that are doing well." And I was like, "Yeah, we're doing well." By the way, that is someone who you will always take their phone call. There's other
100%.
people who you will go, "Oh, that's that guy. Hardly make any money on him. Why am I even working with him?" You're hoping this is one of the interactions where I actually make it work. That's no fun.
No, it's not. And that's one of the things too. Those conversations happen all the time at BCS, at the summit. When brokers and carriers sit down, specifically over lunch and lanes or our speed networking opportunities, one of the questions that I've heard people ask is, "What do you need on this load?" Brokers are asking carriers, "What do you need to be profitable on this load?" And then they'll take that back to their customer. I've seen a number of deals done between brokers and carriers that center around that. And it goes back to, I know that broker transparency is a huge issue right now. There's the question period the comment period rather has been extended, I believe now until, I think it's May or whenever it is extended until. But I've had a number of conversations with carriers and brokers about the transparency issue. And one of the things that I've landed on is I'm all for transparency, so long as it's voluntary. You know what? Because, and by the way, so is everybody else. If you're a carrier or a driver, I guarantee you the first time the government comes knocking on your door demanding you show your costs to your vendors or to your customers, you're going to pitch a fit too. So let's not pretend.
Yeah, you mentioned the comments. So what is that related to?
So the FMCSA has a comment period where they're considering changing the language around broker transparency and making it obligatory and trying to put more strict enforcements on that so that carriers and drivers can go and demand how is it worded? Demand the information that's on the freight transaction. So basically, if you're a party to a freight transaction, you have the right to review all costs associated with that transaction. And currently, brokers have carriers waive that right in 90% of the broker carrier agreements that are signed.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm from the automotive industry, and in automotive, if you're one of the big companies, Nissan, BMW, Ford, GM, whatever, a lot of them will say, "Hey, you want to work with us, Nippon Denso or JCI or whatever?" They say, "We need to understand your pricing. Please break it down in Excel spreadsheets. Give us proof." And there's always some game playing. So if there's not trust in that relationship, and I don't think that you want me to make any money, then I'm going to cheat. So, when the government thinks they can mandate something like that, they can't. There's just no way. You can't manage millions and millions of transactions across the country. If I don't trust you and you don't trust me, then the transparency means nothing.
Yeah. And that's why we're focusing in hard on relationships, because if you are in a relationship and you want that relationship to be mutually beneficial, that desire demands the kind of transparency that will result in both parties being benefited and profitable. And so if you want that kind of relationship, one of the proofs is how open and transparent you are with your partners.
Right. Dan, I told you this story, and I won't go into it in detail here, but I told you the story. I had a customer, and they just happened to be in the Detroit metro area, who was constantly saying to me that you're ripping us off. And I said, okay, let me come over. We had 20 loads, and I went through them, showed him what our cost was, what we charged him. And before we started, he goes, so you're going to show me what you paid for all of these? And I said, can you handle it? And he goes, what do you mean by that? I was like, can you handle that we're a for-profit business? Because if you're going to look at and go, oh, you made $100 here. You're like, yeah, we're making a living. We're living indoors and eating every day. I think that's the transparency. So if I say, Dan, here, I made $300 on this, you're like, I didn't make any money on that. You're like, okay, let's go through and let's see what we got. If you're a trusted partner, I want you to make money and you want me to make money. I can't afford for you as the carrier to go out of business if I like working with you. And by the way, you can't afford for me to go out of business or say, hey, Dan, I can't work with you anymore. I got to find a less quality carrier who can do it for cheaper. That doesn't work.
No, when I go back to my brokerage years, when I was slinging freight 50, 60 loads a day sometimes, it's like I had a carrier. I had 75% of my loads were ran by two carriers. And I overpaid those carriers for that specific reason. I loved working with those carriers. I did not mind paying them more because, one, they didn't have to go out and find freight. They had predictability in their business, and I had reliable partners. And so I wanted them to do as well as they could do. Now, what they did with the money and whether they remained profitable with the money, that's on them. But so far as my part as their broker, I did right by them. And I think a lot of people want to do right by their partners. It's just finding who is willing to take the first step. It's one of the hardest things. And I'll say one more thing too about the relationship piece. Complaining is easy. It's so easy to complain about carriers, brokers, and carriers. It's so easy to complain about brokers. Again, no one's doing themselves any favors by not adding fuel to the fire of things we can complain about. But we have to move beyond complaining.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what the broker carrier summit's all about. Again, it's from conflict to collaboration. These are relationships that hopefully get built that are going to make you money and have you be able to provide better service if you're a broker or a carrier. And by the way, I say the same thing related to shippers. I don't like transactional shippers. I know it's an important part of the business, but I always used to say when people would say to me when I sold that service, oh yeah, I'll send you a spreadsheet and you just put the numbers in. I was like, no, I don't do business that way. You give me your bills, I'll look them over. If I think I can save you money and improve your service, we'll talk, but I'm not going to play the game where you send me something every morning and I try and be the cheapest. I hate that kind of business. Anyway, so Dan, let's talk a little bit about some of the tracks. So you already mentioned one of the tracks, which is the security and compliance.
Yeah, fraud prevention and compliance.
What are some other tracks?
So we have a legal and finance track, talking about financial issues that occur in trucking companies, legal issues that are facing the industry right now. I don't know if we're going to be able to get the FMCSA to be physically present in the room at Indianapolis, but they were physically in the room in Fort Worth, but we'll try and get them remotely at the very least. So we have a legal and finance track. We have a sales and operations track talking about everything from hiring to load optimization and management. We have a technology track that focuses on how to maximize and optimize your technology, whether you're a broker or a carrier, how to view technology. as a broker or a carrier. We are an industry with technology aversion. We're very slow to adopt new tech. And
And then we get enamored with it when we get it.
yeah, then it's indispensable. Like overnight, we can't live without this new widget thing that we have. So those are our 4 tracks. Also, we have learning labs, and these learning labs are specifically designed to make you money. Carriers, brokers, either or, both, does not matter. We have a learning lab focusing on how to win dedicated freight. Carriers, if you are not a fan of working for brokers, ironically enough, come to the Broker Carrier Summit and learn how to win dedicated freight yourself. Brokers, you're not carriers, but you can learn a thing or two about learning or about how shippers approach their transportation partners and find out how to win more freight yourselves. We also have a learning lab on reimagining sales and marketing, how that can help drive your revenue growth. We have Melanie Patterson reprising her role talking about government contracting again. So all of these, again, everything at the summit is designed to add value, whether it's relationships and connections or whether it's actually putting dollars in your pocket. I was talking to Mike Riccio the other day, and he asked the question again. He goes, so why will people continue to come?
Now, where's he work?
He's More Than Miles Consulting. I think he's a former executive director of the TIA at some point as well. I think he's still on the board over there. But why would people continue to come to the Broker Carrier Summit? I said, it's easy, Mike. They make money. They make money here. Other conferences they go to, they have a good time, they drink, they meet some people, they get a bunch of business cards, but people leave with freight from the BCS every single time.
Yeah. Very important. Very important. So you have lots of great sponsors this year. So tell me, who are your sponsors and what do each one of them do?
Yeah, we're going to go through all of them. We have about 30 sponsors, I think, for the BCS this year.
Then don't go into great detail. Just give us one bullet about each one.
All right, well, let's start with, so one of them is TIE Software. TIE is actually sponsoring our podcast this year, our podcast network that we're building. And TIE is a TMS provider specifically designed to help brokers optimize and streamline.
I've interviewed Mitch on here.
Yeah, so TIE, they offer a great service, and they're leading the way in a lot of different ways when it comes to integrating artificial intelligence and system optimizations into the freight management solutions. They're a sponsor of ours. Descartes, and there are many brands. They're a sponsor of ours as well. This year, they're sponsoring one of the tracks. They're also doing our signage. I mentioned Highway sponsoring our fraud prevention track. We have Cargado, Convoy, DITAT, another TMS, good friends with Eric over there at DITAT. Carrier Source, I don't know if Rob Light, he's basically put together the Yelp of trucking is what he calls it. So it's carrier reviews by the brokers who use them. What they're doing is phenomenal. If you haven't talked to Rob over there yet, you really should. They're doing great things. We also have some local sponsors from Indianapolis. FST Logistics, just down the road from me. So they're sponsoring as well. We have Truck Parking Club, Truck Stop is.
I just talked to those guys, yeah.
Yeah. So Truck Stop is also a partner of ours. Banyan, Revanova, Trip Excess or a Trip Insurance, first-time sponsor there. And again, TAFS is reprising their role again as well. They're sponsoring our finance track. So that's one of the coolest things that I'm excited about from the BCS is that it's not just brokers and carriers who are saying, we want to fix the relationship. Literally every piece of the BCS, from our board to who our sponsors are, to our attendees, everyone who comes and is involved is saying, to some extent, we believe that broker-carrier relationships, 1, can be fixed, 2, should be fixed, and 3, affect us. If you're a factoring company, the broker-carrier relationship affects you. If you're a TMS provider, it affects you. If you're an onboarding company or outsourcing company, nearshoring company, it affects you. And all these companies are coming together and agreeing and saying, yeah, it does. And we want to be a part of fixing it.
Yeah, I love it. I know we just touched on some of the sponsors, and I know you're absolutely right about fixing this relationship, because I think it affects everybody. It prevents us from doing the best job we can do. And I think it's one of those things that it's almost built in to be adversarial until you make it not. There's a tendency to say, you lose, I win, or you win and I lose. We need to get these to be win. The customer needs to win. The shipper needs to win too. And that's the kind of relationships we need to build. And Those don't happen because I got a new API connected me to another transportation management system. Those are all necessary. We got to free up time to build those relationships. And I think relationships also, I see you once a year at a conference, Dan, but I do talk to you on the phone. But once you've talked to somebody in person, those phone calls and those text messages mean a lot more than the guy you've never met.
They do. And those kind of relationships, Joe, don't happen on accident.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to say it. These don't happen accidentally.
Yeah. You have to
It's
be
like saying a great marriage doesn't happen accidentally. You're working on it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You have to work on it every day. And which is important because every day you have to recommit yourself to working on it and doing the work that is necessary to fix those relationships. So yeah, we do things on purpose.
Yep. I love what you're doing. And again, I can honestly say this. When I ask people all the time what conferences they're going to, people talk about it throughout my conference. I just talked to Tyler Hildebrand. He was on my podcast. He's down in Cincinnati. He mentioned, yeah, I'll be there. Yeah, I'll see you there. It just comes up. It is very much this is grassroots. This is a conference almost that had to be created. It feels that way to me. And I don't say take nothing away from any of the other conferences. Conferences all have a kind of a flavor, and you find your people. This is something that's really struck a chord with the transportation space. I think you're seeing that if you look at the 30 sponsors, that tells you something. And forget just the sponsors. I talk to a lot of people who say, yeah, I got to be there. And one other thing, Dan, I was at that conference, the TIA conference, where you and Mr. Bain decided to go have some bourbons and talk about the problems of the world. That was in California.
Yeah, it was San Diego. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It was a great conference, the TIA. We were just at Manifest. I go there every year, love it. There's conferences down in Austin. I'm not against going to the West Coast, but I live in the Midwest, and we need more conferences where the freight is. This is 75% of the population east of the Mississippi. That's where the freight is moving. Not that you're not welcoming people from the West Coast, but it would be nice if you said there was more drivable conferences. We should be able to drive to a conference that is close by. There's a lot of people in the Midwest. I know people in California and Oregon are going, where is the Midwest anyway?
Where's Indiana? I don't know where it is. We're here with our nice weather and our beaches, and everybody comes to us, which is true. That's why the conferences are always in sunny places. But yeah, we try to make it.
Well, there's no place more beautiful than Indiana once the weather changes. So
that is very true. That's the reason why I'm still here.
Yep. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time. I'll make sure I put a link to the conference, a link to your LinkedIn profile. Any other links you give me, I'll put those in the show notes so people can reach out and talk to you. And I absolutely love what you're doing. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks for the time. Always a pleasure talking with you, my friend.
Yep. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward.
You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.